All right. I was almost about to fail day two making these videos, and that's not going to happen. All right. What's going on, guys? This is episode number 2. Okay. It's late. I just got back from the gym. I've got steaks cooking. My wife is cooking steaks. So this can be super quick. I know I look like a douchebag, but this video is going to be super valuable. It was going to be something that I was going to do in a longer video, but this will only take me about 15 minutes to go over. It is extremely valuable, and it's something I really, really, really wish when I started really building sales teams, okay? Or my first sales team that I really started putting together. So long story short, a while ago, uh, I was doing fractional, basically sales director, CRO, whatever you want to call it. I was coming into companies, think bar rescue style, go in, I'd roll a bunch of heads, take back control of the department, redo the process, re-recruit, retrain, scale it up, and then I would exit myself out of the org chart. And the first company that I really did this with, we went from 0 to a little over 100 reps in about a 6-month period. So I was struggling trying to figure out what KPIs mattered and what I should be looking at from a role perspective. So for my setters and for my closers, okay, as well as my actual team leads. Okay, I'm going to talk about the team lead portion at the end because this will all make sense as I kind of wrap it up. But I was trying to figure out, how do I look at the role and everybody in that role, similar to how I would look at marketing, right? So marketing, you look at your overall effectiveness with ROAS, right? Return on ad spend, right? So I wanted to figure out how I could do this for my setters and for my closers, but also not just at a high level for the actual entirety of the role, but also at an individual level so that I could prioritize certain setters with different leads. I could also prioritize my closers with bookings. Okay. And I wanted to figure out the best way to do this because one, close rate was kind of up and down. It you can go off close rate, but ultimately, if somebody has 10 appointments and they close 2 deals and they're at a 20% close rate, but somebody has hundreds of appointments and, they're at 15, right? It can kind of like, it didn't give me what I wanted. And I constantly kind of started second guessing myself. So I wanted something a little bit more specific. So what I came up with after the fact, I wish I knew this, was 2 metrics. And the 2 metrics that I'm going to talk about are ROSA and ROCA. Okay. Return on setter activity. Okay. So ROSA, which is return on setter activity. Okay. Then ROCA. Okay. Which is return on closer activity. Okay. And I'm going to break down this first before I go back to my freaking paper and super ugly writing. But basically, what we look at is, let's say it's November right now. Let's say in October, we spent $100,000 on ads. Okay. And let's just say, hypothetically, for round numbers, we generated 1,000 leads. Okay. So we spent 100K. Okay. In ad spend. Okay. And we generated, in terms of net new leads, 1,000. Okay. What this means is our average lead cost for the month of October, okay, is $100. Now, if you really want to get good at this, and I'll show you guys this a little bit more towards the end when I share my screen, if you want to get really good at this, you need to break this down by source because it matters, right? If you're running YouTube or you have organic, okay, versus paid meta, right? You want to break this down by source, okay? Your average lead cost for YouTube, your average lead cost for organic. If you're doing organic, take your content production, the payroll, the salary, the bonuses, anything that has to do with organic, the software you use, right? And use that as kind of your benchmark for spend, okay? Because I promise you, it's just going to make sense as we get into this. Meta, right? But ultimately, you can start just high level overall, right? What's your average spend, right? What did you spend to generate all of your leads total? Okay, how many leads did you actually generate? And then you're going to divide the two, okay? So 100K divided by 1,000, right? We get $100 per lead, okay? So $100 average lead cost. Okay. So what can we do with this? Well, when we're looking at our setters, okay, we're obviously tracking, or you should be tracking, obviously, your setters production. So let's say I have 10 setters, okay, and I give every single one of them 100 leads each. Okay. So it's round robin, it's standard delegation. right? So every single one of these setters, and technically speaking, I invested as a business $10,000 into each one of them. Okay, because I gave them $100, or sorry, 100 leads each at $100 a pop. Okay, do the math. That equals $10,000 invested into each one of them. Okay, now in that 30-day period, what I'm looking at is what was their production off of those net new leads that I gave them. So, for example, if somebody generated $100,000, okay, off the new, okay, not leads from previous historical stuff, but new leads that I gave them, right, then they would have a 10x return, right? Think in terms of ROAS, right? But ROSA, right? We gave them 100 leads. Each lead cost $100. We invested $10,000. They produced 100 grand in revenue. Okay. And you can also do this on a revenue basis or a cash basis. Okay. So rep A has a 10x return. Now, let's say across the board, so all 10 of my setters, okay, we do ROSA for every single one of them. Let's say the average across the board was a 5x, right? Now, obviously, if you have 10 setters and you're giving them each 100 leads, right, they're drastically under capacity. And one of the easiest ways that you can make a ton of extra money just literally going into the next month is if they're below that baseline, they're below the average across all 10 of them. So you're going to get each one's individual return, okay? And then you're going to average those out, right? Anybody that's underneath that 5x return, let's say that's the average, right? You turn their lead flow off and they need to rework all the leads that you've already given them to get back to the baseline before you turn them back on lead flow. Okay. And you start the month always like this. So people are working the leads that they should have closed, right? And this is where lead source and stuff along those lines really start to matter, because if somebody gets YouTube leads that are organic versus somebody that gets Facebook meta leads, right? You can't expect the same return on those two lead sources. But hypothetically, let's just keep it, everybody's on the same lead source. Okay. What we're doing is we're starting the month with anybody that's below our average across all 10, working the leads that we've already given them to get back to the return. So as a business, we're not losing money just giving them more and more leads, right? And what we're also doing is we're giving the first week or two to the people that produce the highest return, right? If somebody has a 2x return and somebody has a X return, we cannot afford as a business to give the leads to the person who has a 2x return. Okay. And I really hope this is making sense, because if you do this math with each one of your setters today, you can go into the next month making a hell of a lot more money on the deals that should have closed. Okay. The sets that should have happened. Okay. And you can also prioritize the lead flow to the people that are constantly giving you the highest return as a setter. Okay. Now, that is one of the biggest things, biggest lessons I can give you from a setter management perspective. When you're going in and having a one-on-one with them and they're below the average, hey, Jim, out of all 10 setters, right, the average across all of you guys is a return of a 5x, right, on ROSA. You're at a 3x, right? So you're going to start in November. Okay, let's say we're coming out of October. You're going to start in November reworking the sets and the leads that we already gave you until you get up to a 5x return. So you need 2 more deals before we turn you back on lead flow. Now, what this also does is allows you to give all of your best leads, or not your best leads, but more lead flow to the individuals that are producing the highest return. Okay. And again, just going back to capacity, I'm not going to get into capacity formulas for setters or anything along those lines right now, but a setter taking 100 new leads per month is drastically under capacity. So you want more of those leads going to the best guys or girls. So now let's talk about ROCA, return on closer activity. So let's say we have the same ad spend, right? $100,000. Out of the 1,000 leads that we generated, let's say for this example, right, we booked, I don't know, I'm just going to use this for round numbers again, 100. So we booked 100 of these basically leads into the closers. Okay. So whether that's self-booked or it's directly through the setters doing outbound and all of that stuff, we booked 100 of them. So basically what our average cost per booking, okay, so calendar booking, not if they showed up, not anything along those lines, but just cost per booking that we put on the calendar for each closer is $1,000. So $1,000 is our booked call cost. So let's say we have 2 closers. We give each of them 50. What that means is we put $50,000, okay, into each one of these closers. It's the same setup. When you have a bunch of closers, and I'm going to go over actual case study here in a second, but let's say you have 10, 15, 20, 30 closers, right? And you're trying to figure out, how do we get the next $300, $400, $500,000 of production out of this group of 20 or 30 closers? Well, what you can very easily do is take the baseline, the average across all of them for return on closer activity. So you're going to take the average of the cost per booked call, and you're just going to multiply that by how many bookings you gave to each closer. And all you're going to do is take their production from that period, from those bookings, okay? Net new bookings, not deals that they followed up with and closed from the previous, quarter or whatever the case may be. I'm talking about net new bookings and net new revenue that they generated from that, okay? That's going to give you your ROCA, which all it is if somebody has 50 bookings and the average cost per booked call is $1,000, you invested 50 grand. And if they produced $100,000, they're 2x ROCA, okay? So when you get the average across all of your closers, again, let's say you have 20, 30 closers, or in the beginning, you even have a smaller number, but just in general, I'm just going to use for the larger teams right now as an example. If you have an average of 5x, okay, so you invest 50, right, and they produce $250,000, right? And you have a bunch of closers that are below that average, right? They need to be following up and closing the deals that they should have closed, that they made offers to, before you continue giving them booked calls. Otherwise, you as a business are just bleeding when you could be giving these calls to somebody who's producing way higher of a return and is barely, past 60% capacity in terms of calendar availability, right? So case study I'm going to give is a company. They had about 50 closers, right? We went in, and actually, I'm just going to pull this up for you guys because I can show you how this actually looks when you start to generate these reports. Let me just make sure there's no names in here. Beautiful. There we go. Awesome. All right, there isn't, so I can share this. Perfect. Okay, so screen, window here, boom. Awesome. All right, so when we're looking at ROCA, right? So the cost for the actual booked call in this case was $202, right? We had 2,347 booked calls, right? And here's kind of the cash up front, basically, that we collected. Here's the actual ROCA, obviously red. This is out of HubSpot, really easy setup. You can comment and I'll drop you the formula so you can run this and do it yourself. What I'd recommend is just starting in spreadsheets and doing this, manually each month. Okay. But what we looked at was, for that month, how many bookings were going to individuals that weren't basically producing above, in this case, a 2.5x, okay, on the front end. And what we did is we reprioritized, going into the next month, all of the bookings for anybody that was below that threshold to the top producers, okay, to the people that were giving us the 5x, the 6x, the 7x. And ultimately what we uncovered was a $500,000 monthly leak, okay, $1 million per 2-month period. Crazy. We didn't change anything. We just reprioritized the deals. And that doesn't even include, right? Because again, if we're going to the closers and we're saying, hey, you're below the average, right? What are they doing? They're reworking their deals so they can get back to the average so that we can put them back on the rotation for bookings. Okay. So you're getting more production out of follow-up, and you're getting way more production on the front end closing percentage because you're giving your bookings to the highest producers in terms of return. Okay. Now you can do some really cool stuff with comp plan too around this, where you can actually set them up to where their ROCA increases their commissions so that they're constantly motivated to follow up and get the highest return. Okay. But there's a lot of really cool stuff that you can do with this. Now, going back and getting out of screen share, and then also like return on setter activity, you can also do this in a report in HubSpot. You can track, obviously, whether you're in green, which means you're doing way better than, last month or the previous quarter. Yellow means you're on track, or red meaning you're below, right? So let me get out of this. Here's kind of what I will wrap with. When I'm looking at these two metrics, I look at the overall setter, right, ROSA. So the overall, I also get the average of all of the individuals, and then I look individually every single month at the end of the month, okay? And this is when I'm closing out my baseline, okay? Or when operations is closing out the baseline and sending it to the sales director. If anybody is below the threshold on the setter team, right, they get taken off the delegation until they get to a certain point. I tell them how many deals they need to generate from the leads we've already given them from the previous period. Okay. And they need to get to that threshold before, obviously, the next pay period or the next 30-day or whatever tranche we want to do, right? So that they can get put back on rotation. Okay. This safeguards you from bleeding. It also helps you a ton when you're bringing on new hires, right? Hey, we're going to invest $10,000. That means that you're going to get 10 bookings if they're a closer, right? In this use case, right? And all we need you to do is get us back a 5x return. So you need to produce $50,000. Okay. Once you produce that 50 grand, boom, you're in rotation and we know you're solid and, we can feed you tons of bookings. Okay. Same thing for setters, right? Now, a few things to take note of before I kind of wrap this video up. When you're looking at a 30-day period for attribution around ROSA or ROCA, right? One thing that you're going to see is some reps will have a much higher return on them individually over a 60, 90-day period. And what that means is they're actually really solid with follow-up. So if you look at 30 days, and let's say Jim is a 4X, but me, I'm an 8X, right? But then you look at 60-day in terms of attribution from that 30-day period. So not new from, this period, this second month, but just the bookings from this period, right? And then I go from an 8X to a 9.5, right? Because I close an extra deal or two in the next month. But you look at Jim and he goes from a 4 to a 12, right? Jim is actually a much better, I would say, maybe not better closer on the front end, but he is much better at maintaining his pipeline and managing his follow-ups and closing deals out. Okay. So when you first look at this, look at 30 days, don't freak out right away, then take it from a quarter, right? So look across the entire last quarter. Okay. Because you're going to see your real averages. And when you're drawing averages, a really good thing to set and just something to keep in mind is each quarter, right, when you're going from Q1 to Q2, right, you're going to establish a new average for ROSA and a new average for ROCA. Okay? You're not going to do this every single month. So lots of really cool stuff you guys can do. That's ROSA, that's ROCA. I hope this video helps you guys. If you have any questions, comment below. You can also scan this real fast and ask any specific questions and I'll answer them for you. Let me pull this back open real quick just for you guys real quick. Going back down into, oh boy, where's it at? Come on. Sorry, guys. I'm new with this YouTube stuff, but I'm committed. All right, cool. You guys can scan this QR code and ask any questions that you might want. Happy to answer. And again, my whole goal with this is just to help you guys get from distress to eustress with your sales department and hopefully your company. So with all that being said, my name is Aaron Platt. Hope this video helped you. If you have questions, comment below, send in a submission. If you have a more in-depth question, I'd be happy to answer it specifically for your use case. And yeah, implement ROSA, implement ROCA. You're going to close it out every single month so that you can keep a tab on what's going on. Each month you roll over. You're going to close off the people that are below the average, have them rework their leads or rework their bookings until they get to a certain number that meets your average. So you can put them back on rotation for leads or back on rotation for bookings. Okay. This will drastically change the profitability of your marketing, and it'll also drastically change the profitability of your sales department and your overall business. So with that being said, hope you enjoy, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow for the next video.